Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the Professor, Greg Dooley, and the pundit, Steve Clark. Men, take the mic.
A Wolverine record at the draft in the D. Who went where and how do they fit with their new teams? Dusty May continues to acquire players, and they literally got a big one on Monday. And we'll discuss the future of the show. But first, this is the Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark. We're proudly presented by Nick Hopwood, a certified financial planner, founder, and president of Peak Wealth Management. Retire with confidence. We highly recommend going to Nick's website at peakwm.com for any of your investment questions. Greg, great to see you again. What a fun weekend with the NFL draft going on.
Weekend. I didn't go to the draft. Steve did. He's going to talk about that. I was busy grading projects. And who kept showing up in some of my students' projects, Steve? Do you know who this person was? It was the pundit himself, Steve Clark, who apparently I gave out your name and number to too many of my students, Steve, but you did an awesome job. So thank you for supporting me, my students, the University of Michigan, adding color, insight, historical analysis in several of the projects. I hope that was fun for you.
It was. I always ask them, are you enjoying the class? Every one of them loved your class.
Well, and for context, so I have a final project that is a video and I teach 3 different classes. They're different topics, but I highly encourage them for a small percentage of what we call the rubric, or what their grade, to reach out to what I call an expert. And I often provide them with help to find someone who can help support, whether it's their documentary or their leadership talk or whatever they're doing for me for my final project. And Steve's one of the people on the short list, along with a bunch of Eric Adelson, some of the people you know from WTKA, John U. Bacon, other people like this, right? So, Steve, thank you for helping out. Listen, we've picked up followers. We're heading into the summer. We'll have more kind of a business note at the end. But I will be on the west side of Michigan for any fans of the podcast. I'll be at the U of M Club of Holland supporting their scholarship dinner on May 14th. I will tweet out and share details about that. I'm looking forward to meeting some of you if you're on the west side. But Steve, I wonder at that thing if I'm going to get some questions about the draft. We got to lead with the draft. We got to lead with Michigan because they were the story, and obviously for us, but for a lot of people. And a lot of people, it was kind of forced down their throats, whether you were watching Rich Eisen on the NFL Network, who was just talking so much about the Michigan players and the team. But on day 2, the team itself, at least the players who could, were trotted out through the masses, the throngs of Lions fans, up on the stage, celebrated to the love of Michigan fans. But everyone in that crowd was not a Michigan fan. No. Those are NFL fans. They are Notre Dame fans. They are Ohio State fans, Michigan State fans, not college fans. For us, for the small group, a large group, I suppose, in the world. But it was fun. It was, I got to say, I tasted some of the saltiness of some of the people who weren't crazy about it. It was a great honor to have a college team celebrated on the stage at an NFL draft. Was pretty cool.
Well, the reason why you wouldn't see Alabama or Clemson players doing at the NFL draft is the NFL draft need to be nearby Clemson and Tuscaloosa, which there haven't been any. So This just made it convenient. It was a rare sight. It took me by surprise. For the most part, there were a lot of Michigan people there, and they loved it.
Michigan versus everybody, Steve. It was never more true this year. I loved it. I actually joked with my wife. I go, they're doing this. It's so funny. Eisen tipped everybody off, by the way, on the NFL Network that it was going to happen. So I was ready for it.
Smart for you, awesome. By the way, to going to the NFL Network where Rich Eisen is leading the coverage as opposed to ESPN where most people go.
I bounced around a little bit because I think ESPN's coverage is a little more in depth. But Rich was there for the Michigan people constantly. We'll talk about that a little bit.
And Adam Schefter was on it, like in the moment, things changing, first to report it.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Yeah. Solid. So the talk last pod was where JJ's going to go. And what we talked about was, could he break this top 3? And I did ask, could he be top 10? Steve, without knowing anything you know, if you sat here today in front of the microphone and I told you he wasn't even in the top 4, okay, where would you have thought JJ was drafted? If I ask you that on the spot.
Like I said on the last Professor in the Pundit program, it was about how much were the Vikings willing to trade up and give draft capital. And what did I text you about a half hour before the draft even started on Thursday night?
You said something to the effect that Minnesota, you have a hunch that they're going to basically stick around and they're going to be big winners in this draft. And you were spot on. Now, they moved a little bit. But you were spot on. You nailed it. And I think, again, I don't want to talk about the draft grades, but by all accounts, Minnesota did a really nice job, especially up front, by waiting for him, basically. Now, he was a top 10 pick, barely. He was 10th, but they made that move, and of course, but 4 quarterbacks went before him.
So as the J.J. McCarthy hype train steadily moved up the hill, there were 4 teams in the top 11, count the Vikings, that were interested in him. And almost everybody thought the Vikings would trade up into a very high slot, a 4 or a 5, to beat other people to the punch. Now, he got linked to the Commanders at 2, the Patriots at 3, the Vikings wherever they could trade up to, plus the Giants at 6. In every situation but the Vikings, I kept hearing it's between JJ and somebody else. And it made me start, what if JJ's a loser in all of these?
Yeah.
To the Commanders, to the Patriots, to the Giants. The Vikings, if he got past number 6, probably felt they were in great shape. And I also think that the Vikings probably had a plan B, and that was going to be Michael Penix. And by having the Giants pass on McCarthy at 6, the Vikings were probably thinking, we're either going to get plan A or plan B and not even have to move any of our draft capital. And then a funny thing happened at pick number 8, in which Michael Penix went to the Atlanta Falcons.
The talk, outside of Michigan, the talk of the draft.
And what that did was now it's J.J. McCarthy, Bo Nix, and Spencer Rattler. Most people had Bo Nix way below J.J. McCarthy and Nix by several rounds over Spencer Rattler. At this point, Penix gets selected at 8th. You're now down to the Vikings who want him. Penix, the backup plan, is gone in Atlanta. And then you also have the Broncos and the Raiders, who are starving for a quarterback. The Vikings just said, let's stop playing around. Let's take our win and let's move up with the Jets. And by the way, there was some talk about the Jets drafting quarterbacks because Aaron Rodgers is on the second year of his contract, and his base salary in 2025 jumps from $3.5 million to $37.5 million. And because he's flaky and 40, you really don't know what Aaron Rodgers might do in terms of the rest of his NFL career.
You're talking about Aaron Rodgers, right?
Yes, flaky and 40.
So it gets even more than that. Their whole plan for the rest of the draft was based around the assumption that they'd have their quarterback. So if that fell through, it's like killing the queen ant. Like, it would have been a mess in that draft room. So they had to do it. They did it. Good for JJ. He seems happy. How do you feel about the Vikings as a place for him?
It's the best situation for him, Greg. I mean, when you have Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison on your team, you're not rebuilding in the same way that Washington, New England, and the Giants are. And even though Minnesota has never won a Super Bowl, and those other 3 teams have won multiple Super Bowls, Minnesota is better off in 2024 than the rest of them by far. And as I said, the Vikings were willing to wait this out, and then the casualties in this after that was Denver having to go get Bo Nix. It started getting desperate, and the Raiders were left holding nothing and saying, okay, we just got to go get Brock Bowers, who was figured to be number 2 back last year.
Yeah, they needed a quarterback, the Raiders did, but Brock Bowers is a pretty sweet pick. In my opinion, this was wild. 6 quarterbacks taken in the top 12. You've all seen it. So you think this is the right spot for JJ. By all accounts, like behind the scenes and all the quiet talk, it sounds like this is the place he wanted to be. Steve, pundit, you think it's the best place for him. We're going to see him, if you're a Lions fan, twice a year at least now. Play, the Lions. I'm happy. I'm excited. He seemed genuinely excited. It seems like a good situation for him. There are still the same questions about him, though. Is he ready for this? Is he ready for the NFL? The classic line is he didn't have to do anything at Michigan, which you can disagree. He was there when we needed him. But will it translate to the NFL? It makes it exciting. I can't wait to see how these guys do. But we had a lot of other guys picked as well, right? So Chris Jenkins went number 49. Steve, where did Jenkins go? What do you feel about this fit? I think he's going to Ohio.
Yeah, the former Michigan captain is expected to start in Cincinnati, and in a roundabout way was selected by the Bengals because of the Lions, who signed DJ Reader in free agency. Reader's, a run stuffer that the Lions really kind of needed up the center. That all of a sudden opened a void for a run stopper for the Bengals, and that's why Jenkins was drafted there, and I think he's going to do exactly that for Cincinnati. And an analyst from The Athletic, says the Bengals are absolutely going to love his leadership, his effort, both on and off the field.
Yeah, then Mikey goes number 50 right after him. We had a couple of times where we went back-to-back and back-to-back-to-back later, but that was cool to hear both their names. They did cut to his party, and I don't know if you saw the reaction, Steve, but I assume it was his mom, his aunts, whatever. It was like a Baptist church. There were hallelujahs, and it was long. It was like a long, bless you, on their feet, dancing, for a long time, almost relief. I'm so happy for him. And boy, you talk about questions about JJ after the draft that were still out there. There was so much love from Mikey, from Nick Saban, from all of these people about this guy who finally his story became a national story and people understand what's going on. Gosh, I hope it works out for him in the NFL.
It's all well-deserved. And I think last season when we were first starting the podcast, we were talking about, San Russillo, you got to see up close how well he was regarded by the coaching staff and the team, of a captain before being a captain. And I was talking about the play that I loved him so much doing in Columbus, taking that ball out of Kate Stover's hands. It was a play that wasn't repeated a lot on TV, and now it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's like top Mikey plays of all time. It's like number one on Fox.
I wonder how much they share from each other. They're showing this clip. Is there an ESPN guy watching the NFL Network and the NFL Network watching the ESPN? It's
I'm sure of it.
It started to get homogenized on the Blake Corum runs too. Which ones they showed. They all had the same little package.
There's 200 players that are being drafted. More than 200, and it's just can we go through them all and find out their best run and that type of thing? Sometimes you go, oh, well, I guess we missed this one.
Everybody shows that throw that JJ threw against Ohio State where the DB turns at the last second. Yeah, so it's good stuff. Junior Colson, Harbaugh takes him, number 69. I believe he was projected higher, Steve.
He was.
If I'm wrong. Yes, great student, by the way. I suspect that Colson dropped a little bit. He is a soft-spoken, kind of quiet guy. I wonder if that turns some people off in some of the interviews. But, of course, who knows this guy better than anyone? It's Ben Herbert. It's Jim Harbaugh. It's his staff. They have Jesse Minter. They obviously know what this guy can do. He does seem to have all the talent. And, obviously, Harbaugh felt much of him where he convinced the room. Now, Harbaugh didn't take 17 Michigan guys. He took a couple. But this was his first pick. Great kid. Just hope it works out for him there. And I love that he's going to Harbaugh into that system.
And he's starting right away because two of the starting linebackers from last year's team are gone. So he's going to have a chance to start and probably will start for the Chargers this year.
And then we're waiting to see where is Blake Corum going to go, right? We've started to think about it. I think it was on all our minds because we weren't sure. Where was Corum projected? What was the earliest possible thing?
The earliest possible thing I saw was second round as the number one running back chosen. Most were saying third, fourth.
Okay.
This is not a surprise.
Yeah. So Corum finally goes number 83 to the Rams. And Rich Eisen, it was almost like he burst when they, I think they were tipped off that it was Corum. He almost burst when they said his name. He invited him to a permanent dinner spot at his table in L.A. He was so happy. And, of course, then they roll all the Corum tape. What do you think about Corum in L.A.?
Unlike the other two that we just talked about, I don't think Corum's going to start with the Rams. They have Kyren Williams. He's a 1,000-yard rusher last year who finished third in the league. He had a heavy workload, though, and the Rams made it known that they needed another capable back who had 260 touches last season, that being Williams. And, the first two picks by the Rams were Florida State defensive players who might have plenty to say at Corum at camp because, Florida State got left out of the playoff.
Sure
but Blake could just...
Not Blake's fault. It's not Blake's fault.
No, and Blake's just going to bring his national championship rings to work someday for show and tell, and maybe if they're nice, Corum has a few to spare.
He does.
He did get 4.
They did get 4.
He did get 4 of them. But Blake Corum fits in the style of Kyron Williams. And they just need to give Williams a bit of a break. So it's not like Corum's going to take his job.
So then right after that, we have another back-to-back because Roman Wilson goes number 84. There's, again, some excitement. Now the Michigan guys are starting to go. In the back of our heads, people are starting to do that math. Are we going to break the record for most players drafted? So this was a good start. What did you think about Roman Wilson, where he landed?
Well, he is expected to start for the Steelers at a position of need. And at 5'10", you should expect him to play more inside in the slot, which will be an adjustment for him since he spent most of his Michigan career on the outside as a deep play threat. Instead, look for him to move the chains in the middle and be able to win some drag routes across the field as well. Multiple draft analysts feel that Roman and the Steelers are a perfect fit and have said so for quite some time. And if you have the NFL ticket, Greg, if you have the NFL ticket, I looked it up. 1 out of 4 years this happens where you play a division in the other conference.
Yes.
Pittsburgh plays Washington this season, and you could see a matchup of Roman Wilson in the slot versus Mike Sainristil at slot corner throughout the entire game.
Oh, I would like to see that. All right. I love it. And then a guy that the team rallied around, he went down. You never know how much injuries are going to affect a guy. Zach Zinter goes back to back to back. He goes number 85. Obviously happy to see it. I believe he goes to Cleveland. And he put out some film right before the draft that he was on his feet and working out a little bit. That must have made Cleveland feel good. If he wasn't injured, most people projected him a lot higher. He goes to Cleveland. How does he fit there?
Well, according to ESPN, the unanimous first-team All-American who didn't commit a penalty in 2023 and gave up only 1 sack was drafted by the Browns, and their philosophy must have been best player available because Cleveland already has 2 All-Pro starting guards. It's also kind of surprising because the Browns only had 2 picks, just 2 picks in the first 4 rounds, thanks to Sean Watson. And,
which the trade is finally complete now, I heard. That was another thing they had. Like, all the details of that trade have finally worked themselves out of the system.
Right. And then the other player the Browns drafted was Michael Hall Jr., a Buckeye who plays on the defensive line. And ironically, if you didn't hear this already, it was Hall who got thrown into the turf by Michigan offensive lineman into the back of the legs of Zach Zinter.
Oh, boy.
So this is not Michael Hall, a deliberate attempt to injure Zach Zinter. That's not where I'm going with this. But it was the body that Zach Zinter got the injury over. And now they're teammates in Cleveland. And speaking of Buckeyes and the NFL somehow makes rivalries and makes some strange bedfellows. Zinter has 5 Buckeye teammates now, and 4 of them have taken recent L's from Michigan. And to help out, he has 3 other Wolverines on the roster in Cleveland, including Devin Bush and Maurice Hurst. And so I was just kind of
to back him up, okay?
Yeah, okay, some words are said. It is kind of weird when you have so much hate for the other team that they end up becoming teammates and they forget about it,
right?
Or they kind of forget about it, and they make unusual bets of public humiliation.
You're right. Plus, he's a rookie, so he'll have to probably buy everyone dinner. And there's a little bit of the hazing of the rookies. And so, but It sounds like that Zinter will have a couple guys in his corner helping him out.
The former Michigan players should probably make Zinter sing Hail to the Victors just to annoy the 5 Buckeyes that are on the roster.
Perfect.
So there's a couple of other teams, too. Jenkins going to have 2 Buckeyes on his team, but the Wolverines outnumber the Buckeyes in Cincinnati with some familiar names like Dax Hill, Chris Evans. By the way, Dax Hill's a slot corner. He could go up against Roman Wilson as well.
Excellent.
2 times a year.
Colson will have some serious Buckeyes with him. Joey Bosa.
Right.
Highly paid, high-profile guy. Roman Wilson's got 3 Buckeye teammates. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And Justin Fields now is in Pittsburgh. Not expected to be throwing him the ball, at least right away. But
it's probably going to be Russell Wilson.
Yeah, probably Russ.
But, when you're a receiver, you got to make friends with the quarterback. And now he may have to make friends with Justin Fields.
I feel like all of this has just made the NFL a little more exciting for us. So that's cool. I think it's very cool.
A lot of Michigan Wolverines in the NFL right now. In fact, the Buckeyes only, I believe, sent 4. 4 Buckeyes went into the NFL draft.
And granted, some of them who could have been drafted returned to Columbus, rather. And Harbaugh broke into the victors on camera. His jacket had the Michigan Steeler Black M's inside. He had the whole thing. So, we kind of said goodbye to Jim Harbaugh, but clearly Harbaugh really hasn't said goodbye to Michigan and being Michigan. We know about the tattoo. He's clearly still really identifying as obviously a Michigan player, and then of course the coach.
So we got Jim Harbaugh, calling Junior Colson. That's out on tape on social media. You have Jim Harbaugh talking about offensive linemen as weapons. So, I mean, look, the quote machine is still going to happen, and it's going to be from a distance. Greg, I and many others became a Patriots fan because of Tom Brady.
Guilty.
And his success.
Guilty.
And I'm no longer a Patriots fan because he's no longer playing for the Patriots.
Same.
Will you become a Chargers fan because of Jim Harbaugh? And I'm asking the listening audience as well. You could certainly reply back to us on the podcast. Are you going to adopt the Chargers as the second team, or at the very least, have a rooting interest in an AFC team along the way? You could still be a Lions fan and kind of root for an AFC challenger, but are you kind of rooting for Jim?
Yes, I am, because he's such a divisive figure, and we've clearly picked sides. He's on Michigan's side.
Yeah.
So absolutely I'm rooting for him. I think a lot of people with me. I'll put a poll out. We'll see.
It's going to be a little bit harder with JJ in Minnesota, but...
Yeah. So AJ Barner went. Yep. Great student, by the way, Steve. Great young man. NFL talent, and certainly NFL size. Great blocker. Has good hands. I think he's going to be a player in the NFL. I think it's a great pick. So I'm happy for AJ.
He's a bruiser. Now, as we look back at a record for Michigan, program record 13 selected overall. It was the top team this year in the draft.
Which is, by the way, the first time it was not an SEC team leading the draft in almost a decade, Steve, that a Big Ten, a non-SEC team had the most players.
And it's going to be defined as maybe one of the last great teams.
A team that grew up together. Yeah. Not to say they didn't have pieces plugged in, AJ Barner, right? They had some pieces plugged in, but 13 players going in. By the way, we can do that first round game all we want. The fact is they probably have 2 or 3 guys who are probably going to be first round next year. What's the difference, Steve? I don't know. But how did the rest of the Big Ten? I saw a bunch of Penn State guys go.
Penn State finished second in the Big Ten with 8. Now, I'm not including Washington, Oregon, and USC in this yet. I mean, if you're curious, those 3 teams combined for 25, okay?
I didn't do the exact math, but if you pictured the conference as it's going to be in 2024, the Big Ten would have beat the reformulated SEC in draft picks. That's the first time, and I know I made a leap there, but that's the first time that has happened in almost 2 decades, for what it's worth.
Get used to it, because the SEC and the Big Ten are going to dominate from now on.
Cool. So we'll talk a little bit about this. I was curious where Cooper DeJean was going to go, Steve, the Iowa product. Most people had him at the end of the first round, but he slipped to round 2. I'm curious to follow his NFL career because the guy's an absolute ball hawk. I assume they're going to put him on special teams because he's just marvelous. I'm curious to see where he goes. Did anyone else jump out at you? Any other picks, Big Ten-wise or otherwise?
Well, the Philadelphia Eagles had the same draft strategy as the Detroit Lions did. I mean, both used their top 2 picks on cornerbacks. Philadelphia probably won that battle with the kid from Toledo, Mitchell, along with Cooper DeJean. And then the Lions went with Terry and Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw out of Missouri. Both teams addressing weakness for their respective teams. You take a look at the NFC North now, the rookie quarterbacks coming in, and the talent at wide receivers there. It's going to be an offense explosion in the NFC North. And if they're drafting on defense, I'm openly wondering, could the NFC North actually be the toughest division in football next year?
It could be. It's a good lead-in, Steve, to halftime because I want to talk about the NFC North a little bit because there was some trolling going on at the podium between the draft teams and the Lions, including the Vikings, the Packers, the Bears, and I thought it made the draft more fun. But why don't we hit that after halftime?
It's halftime here on The Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark. And now joining us in studio to talk a little bit about football and investing is Nick Hopwood, who's a certified financial planner for Peak Wealth Management. Retire with confidence. Nick, you've got your own podcast going, and you're doing something a little bit different. You've got a YouTube channel as well.
Yeah, it's the Trust the Plan podcast with Nick Hopwood and Jim Pilot. And oftentimes it's just us talking, but oftentimes we have guests on as well. And you're right, we do simulcast on the YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/peakwealthmgmt. And we're getting a good following, so check us out.
And I noticed you've put some like social media hits out there with little clips, like little pieces of advice, and they're really good. How have those been received?
Thanks. Yeah, those are the reels, the 30-second clips. We had one that went viral talking about tipping.
Yes.
And it had like 1 million views. It was awesome.
It's crazy how our tipping culture, like at coffee shops and stuff, has gone out of control. Like the guilt of going up to that machine and saying, okay, no, I don't want to give you a $5 tip for my $3 coffee.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with the 20% tip, even if it's bad service, honestly.
In a restaurant.
I've worked in the service industry.
Same.
It's hard, man. Like I was a busboy at Chi-Chi's. You know, it was hard work. But the hard thing is when you're doing carry out and they flip over the iPad and then they want you to tip. That's where it's frustrating for me.
Okay, well, I do think tipping the carry out something is appropriate. It's not 20% though.
Yeah,
Okay.
I do $1 per dish, per entree, you know.
I got a new one for you. I was asked to tip on my oil change.
That's brutal.
Tip on your oil change?
Yes, me if
That's
I wanted to
podcast
leave a
material.
tip.
Time
That
for a
is
Tesla.
wild.
For a Tesla.
It wasn't a car wash where the guy was drying. This was an oil change,
Yes.
and they asked you for a tip. Okay, I just threw up. All right. All right, we are back. So I got to salute the city of Detroit, the Lions fans, for showing up, showing out. You probably know right now it broke an attendance record for the draft. The sea of people with the drone overhead shots was ridiculous. Again, Steve, you talked about the Hallmark movies that our wives love and often many women love, and how we can't really understand. They can't really wrap their heads around why we love things like Augusta and the Master so much. The draft takes it to a new level because at least at Augusta, there's a competition going on, right? Well, Greg, there is a competition with the draft. Okay, explaining that 700,000 people over 3 days went to Detroit to listen to players' names being read.
Say my name.
And, by the way, this guy with 2 thumbs watched almost all of it, okay, and enjoyed it, okay. That's hard to explain to someone who doesn't get sports, how big just the draft is itself. But it was amazing. So shout out to Detroit. Boy, Detroit showed so well. The fans, of course. The city, they had some cool shots. But Steve, you actually got to experience it on probably the best day to go because the first day was a little cold and chilly. You went out for what? For day 2 and 3 on Friday?
Day 2, I went on for Friday.
Yeah, so what happened? What were any takeaways from your visit to the draft? I'd love to hear it.
I got there in the mid-afternoon. I thought I could get there a little bit later, but based on Thursday's reaction, it was probably good to get through. But invited a friend to see if he wanted to go down. You were heading up north, so we thought. And so I went with somebody else, and they happened to have an office that was located just outside the shell. And it was like, he so underplayed it. You know, it's like, I think I got a view of the place. And he sent a picture, and it's like, yeah, you got a view. It's like right there. And that particular office building was having an office party with free food and drink.
Did they have a bathroom?
Yes.
So see, you just answered. I'm like, you had a place to park, it sounds like. You had a place with a bathroom. You had a party with drinks. You had a view of the draft. And it afforded you the ability just to wander down whenever you wanted.
Right.
It sounds like you had the best situation ever.
I did.
People paid a lot of money for this, Steve. There probably were private parties where you could get in to experience it like this. Well done, pundit.
Thank you.
Pundits.
All courtesy to listener Jeff, by the way.
Shout out to Jeff.
The purpose of being there is to be in the environment. And it is kind of a litmus test because a lot of people were watching to see Detroit fail. And they did not fail at all. They thrived in the challenge. And the city looked good. It was definitely more than just presentable.
It's fun down there. For anyone who hasn't been down to that campus march, this area, like there are like stunningly cool bars and like big open spaces, especially when the weather holds, man.
Well,
Like,
and once you got inside the fencing, it was a giant open space.
could you get a beer and stuff once you were in
yes,
there? Okay.
it was
okay.
open container. They had metal detectors from blocks away before even the fencing started. They had metal detectors that you did not have to wait in line. You just walked on the sidewalk and walked right through it. A couple of cops waved as you, went through. There was room to walk. There was room to see the rest of Detroit celebrating. And boy, it felt inviting and made me want to go back on a non-draft weekend.
Yeah. What did you wear down there, Steve? Did you wear your Michigan gear? Do
I
you
wore
have a Lions jersey?
I do not have a Lions jersey. I do
need
not
to
have
get
a
them?
Lions
Do we need to
anything.
get, at this point, after seeing all those Lions jerseys, do we need to get one? Is that it? Do we need to? I think I am going to.
Okay.
We will talk about this in a future podcast, but I felt like that was the thing to wear. What did you have?
What did I have? I had my Professor and the Pundit shirt on.
Perfect.
Underneath, but unfortunately it wasn't warm enough to, release the hounds.
I was going to say.
Type of thing.
Sorry, ladies.
Yeah. Sorry. No time for the gun show today.
Yeah, with the pundit shirt.
Yeah.
Which will,
So
if
I was
nothing else, it's a good conversation starter.
I was dressed for comfort, Greg. I was dressed for comfort. So we finally decided to go in the environment, and we got down into the throng about an hour and a half before it started.
The mosh pit.
And I thought we were in the back third, but when I found myself on TV during the sweeping zip line camera, I said, we were in their upper third. I was kind of surprised. We were in the upper third of the throng when it all kind of started. We made about 9 or 10 picks in because you're just kind of, I said, what's your personality, listener Jeff? And he said, are you one to like be in the mosh pit and not move? Or do you just want to wander and soak up the atmosphere and see what else might be around? And it was like the latter. So we got the feel. It wasn't going to be a whole lot different 9 or 10 picks in. So we wandered out and we went to a steakhouse when it was all said and done.
Okay. See, if it were the first round, I probably would have waited at least until JJ went. And then, and then went to the steakhouse. Because I'm with you. I would have,
The thing about waiting for the Lions pick in the second round, which was going to be late, is the fact that I'm getting older and my back wasn't holding up while standing in the same spot for 2.5 hours. And so we kind of needed to move. But it was great because it was the NFL draft. It was so many people. It was in downtown Detroit. And the next time that this happens, I may be too old to even want to go.
Yeah.
So this was it, and I decided to take advantage of it.
There's a life lesson there, people. Steve, it sounds like you had a great time. Listener Jeff, awesome. That's great. I love it. They pulled out all the stops, though, especially up front, having Eminem come out, who got the loudest cheer, by the way, louder than Barry.
Yes.
And I think, like someone put it this way, it's like you don't see him in the wild that often. Like Eminem, he's around,
wild.
but you don't
see him chasing gazelles.
Well, he doesn't do ads and things like this. He's not, we used to watch MTV. That's where we used to see these people. We just don't see him that much. So it was kind of weird. So he came out, and that was kind of cool.
He's like the new spokesperson for Detroit.
Yeah.
There's been various times.
Well, it could have been
where
Kid
Tim
Rock.
Allen. Well, it could have been Kid Rock, but that's not happening
buddy, by the
anymore.
way, Bob, as I call him. Remember, podcast episode, whatever that was, Ohio State game. Bob, his sharp political views have made him a little divisive for these kinds of things. We don't know how Eminem feels about a lot of this stuff. However, he has kind of moved the top. You said Tim Allen. Yeah.
Dive in to the waters of pure Michigan.
Who else has represented us?
Then there's Jeff Daniels, who still is,
Yeah.
but not at the same degree as Eminem.
Yeah, those are good representatives. It's not that strong. We do have the Barry Sanderses. We have the Joe Dumarses. We have Megatron.
To a certain age group now.
Yeah, Steve Eiserman.
The
we have
younger,
these guys.
you've mentioned guys who are our time as young people.
Yeah, but
all of these young people who came to the NFL draft are going, Barry. It's like us going and saying, Bobby Lane.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah. Okay. So it was awesome. It was a lot of fun. And to have Michigan so integrated into it, meaning Michigan football, obviously a huge thing. Steve, we talked a little bit about Penix to the Falcons. From an analytical standpoint, there's clearly like this higher value placed on quarterbacks right now. 6 go to the first 12. Never happened before. There's a shift in the value and how the offenses work and function. A lot of that's on the quarterback. It still doesn't make sense to me, though, with where they are. They weren't like a team that's on the brink now just because they had Kirk Cousins. They needed other things. So it was a head scratcher to me.
Does not compute. does not compute.
Obviously, we both think it worked out for JJ because it happened, but it did force their hand a little bit to get him. It was odd. And then I don't know which is more odd. We weren't done talking about Penix, right? And then Bo Nix goes, who was projected much later, right? So I don't know, dude. It's wild.
Clearly, Bo Nix was selected by Denver because there was nobody left after Bo Nix. And if the Raiders had traded up to go get Bo Nix, then it's Denver left holding an empty bag.
Yeah.
That forced them to take Bo Nix higher. The Vikings could have stayed at 11 if it wasn't for Penix being taken at 8. And there's other scenarios too, but if you go back to the Penix thing together, and it's been discussed already, but $180 million, 100 guaranteed, 4 years worth. Michael Penix is already 24 years old. You've got a rookie contract and Cousins being played together. Yes, Atlanta has offensive weapons. They have Bijan Robinson at running back. They've got talented receivers. And then they also have Kyle Pitts as the tight end. So they're loaded in skill position players. But the defense, it's like one of the worst in the NFL in sack rates over the last 4 or 5 years. And it looks like they got one for the price of two.
It makes sense if you're assuming you're going to have either a bad outcome or I don't know. But they had needs in other places, okay?
But the other thing is they could divide a fan base by doing this.
Yeah.
You can have people in the Kirk Cousins territory, and then, of course, first bad Cousins game, you're going to want Michael Penix out there.
As though the backup quarterback, especially someone you just drafted in the first round, is going to be the most popular guy for any time it goes bad for Kirk Cousins. So, man, I don't know.
Going to be franchise unrest.
They didn't even, not that there was one, but they didn't, at the podium in the press conference, they didn't really provide their GM a good explanation of why they did it. To me, all right, I'm scratching my head. I did like, Steve, some of the trolling that went on. It always happens at the draft. Brandon Graham, the former Michigan guy, came up and just said the Cowboys suck, which was great. But I love the dynamic between the Packers and the Bears and the Vikings, openly trolling the Lions fans with all the boos. That was wonderful. It's a funny dynamic because it's almost like the Michigan State-Michigan thing from their perspective, where they're clearly our number one rival. And I think for Lions fans, it's probably Green Bay. But Green Bay's biggest rival is clearly the Bears. You know what I mean? So I know it's a little different thing in the pros, but it's a funny little dynamic going on. And the Vikings, you can't say it's the Vikings. And if it's not the Packers for the Lions, it's the Bears. And all those teams have tons of history. But for those two, it's clear. It's Packers, Bears, both ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, as much as Green Bay has won, you could ask the Lions, the Bears, and the Vikings who their number one rival in the North is, and they will all say Green Bay.
Okay, fair enough. It's funny.
Over the years, you've always watched Detroit get short shrifted. Oh, their pick came in. Let's go to commercial break. We'll tell you about who the Lions pick later. Not getting respect, an afterthought. When they even talk about the worst teams in pro history, they even disregard the Lions and their qualifications to having such horrible teams in the past. They gave Detroit all the attention they could want and more. The speeches geared towards Detroit or Michigan, they kept on TV. They were longer speeches, and it was well represented all the way around.
Anecdotally, I always ask my seniors when I have a senior going out, what are you doing? I hear more and more, I'm going to Detroit. I hear it. I'm going to work to Detroit. I'm going to live in Detroit. Where you never heard that.
No.
You went when I went, no one was going to Detroit.
My mom moved to Detroit in the 60s.
Good for her.
And that was in their heyday. It's when they were the 7th largest city in the United States. There was a time where Detroit ruled.
It's
been a long time ago.
Well, it still rules after the NFL draft. Steve, we can't say goodbye for several weeks without doing a few quick hitters because Dusty May's back at it. Juwan Howard found a home. And we even made some changes to the football team. Do you want to run through some of the quick hitters real quick?
Yeah, Juwan Howard back in the NBA, and with the new Brooklyn Nets coaching staff, I don't know anyone, Greg, who wishes ill will towards Juwan. And I got to tell you, with the news of Reggie Bush getting his Heisman Trophy back, I'm more inclined for Michigan, who could raise the banners at Chrysler Center if they want to. Go ahead and do so if it's in the university's best interest.
Great call. It came up with some of my discussions in class. Okay. Shouldn't this spark another question about the Fab Five? So great point. speaking of Chrysler Center, Steve, we're going to have a tall presence in there. Who am I talking about?
Well, you're talking about the biggest move, 7'1" center Vladislav Golden, who played at FAU, averaging 16 points and 7 rebounds last year. He likes Dusty May, right?
Oh, he does, because this is the second time that Dusty got him out of the portal. He got him to FAU from Texas Tech out of the portal. Do they meet? Is there like a portal like Crossroads off a highway somewhere, Steve, where they just keep bumping into each other like a saloon? This guy would be easy to find. So we'll see him. He'll also be easy to find if he shows up in my class, Steve, at 7'1". I don't know if he's still technically an undergrad.
He's a big guy. Got one more year left in college.
So what we all hope are some of these bigger guys that he's bringing in are ready for the Big Ten or get ready for the Big Ten. But you got to say, it's exciting. I got to say, I'm excited about basketball. I want to go back to Chrysler Center. I didn't go this year to see the men. I want to see this team. Anything else?
Another former FAU commit, 3-star combo guard Lorenzo Kaysen, committed to Michigan last week, but it was after we recorded the podcast. So that we talked about all the players that came through last week. This was one more. And then,
not a portal
Golden's
guy.
news
this
on
is
Monday.
A commit. This
is
is
a commit. It was an
commit.
FAU high school commit. And this is what you should expect from every coaching move. I've seen it in football, I've seen it in other basketball programs. We're seeing it here where coach leaves, half the team or more leaves with the departing coach, and then the new coach actually brings in some of the players that were at his last stop, which makes it harder to have that happen if your new coach is an NBA guy.
Yeah.
Because you can't bring NBA players back into college.
Not yet. Not yet.
But imagine if Michigan hired an NBA guy to replace Juwan Howard, we still may be looking at a roster of 4 or 5 people on it. Michigan did lose George Washington III again. He is back in the portal because of all the guards and combo guards.
I didn't hear that. I'm hearing this now.
Yeah, that Dusty May acquired over the last week. George Washington III is now back in the portal.
Okay. He's back in. There's a joke there with his name. Somehow I don't have it. Okay, Steve, we didn't have a great kicking performance. I think I gave them a D, something along these lines, but we did something about it. What did we do?
Michigan got a kicker from Arkansas State, Dominic Zaveda, played for them 2 years, 34 of 40, long of 56, missed only 1 of 72 extra points. I think he had a better season in his freshman year than his sophomore one. Not exactly automatic in short range last year. But honestly, I don't know well enough about Arkansas State to understand any attributing factors in those misses, like weather, how good the snapper was, how good the holder was.
Okay.
But Michigan did address it, and I think there's probably going to be an open competition.
Good. Let's have a competition. Let's put them in pressure situations, because one thing we've benefited from the last couple of years are those short-range field goals. We've just done a great job of it. It's underrated. We'd be talking about it if we didn't make them. It's like the electricity working in your house. You don't talk about it if it's working.
It's automatic.
It was automatic, so we were very fortunate.
James Turner, by the way, free agent with the Lions.
I saw that, so hopefully he makes the squad. We didn't talk about this, but there were a bunch of other guys who landed free agent contracts to make a shot for the teams, guys who weren't drafted, who could have broke that record. Michigan didn't, the all-time record by Georgia, but landed places. Braden McGregor, I saw, went to the Jets. There's some other ones. Many people say if you're not drafted in those first few rounds, you're better off being a free agent because you can kind of pick the place and the depth chart and the place you want to go that you're comfortable with and where the coaches love you.
You're exactly right.
We wish those guys the best,
so
obviously.
Those include Josh Wallace, Drake Nugent, Braden McGregor, Trente Jones.
Awesome. So, Steve, when we come back the next time, we're going to take some time off, barring if, or should I say when, Steve, the crap hits the fan with Michigan athletics, because it's happened several times over the last year. Barring an emergency episode, which we'll give you a heads up on, we'll be back sometime before fall camp to wind up our coverage of not only this exciting basketball team, but of course, Team 145 and all of the other things going around Michigan athletics, Steve. And I'm excited about it. And Nick Hopwood will be back with us as our sponsor.
He's committed to us for another 18 episodes, and that's going to take us through the majority of the season, plus a little bit before and afterwards.
Yeah, so like our listener Ty, who told me, he's still catching up, Steve, and living the 2023 season through the stories and all the things in the news and our analysis, which might be an interesting way. If you haven't listened to all those, go relive the season through the professor and the pundit. Because we do get, it's not like when we drop an episode, but we do get like action on those old episodes. And I always wondered who that is. Well, Ty reached out to me and said, hey, I'm listening. And it's really interesting to hear your perspective as this unfolded. So we have that. Those aren't going away, but we will be back. Thank you for everyone who's followed us, who's listened to us, who supported us, who supported Nick Hopwood. And we'll be excited to return here in weeks, I suppose, Steve, huh?
PeakWM.com. Of course, listening to old episodes have a way of making the pundits sound really bad. But I invite it.
All right. Well,
those things can be amusing.
You know what? But guess what? When we come back, what are we going to be, Steve? It's going to be the undisputed
and undefeated
national champions no matter what when we return for a long time still. So still enjoy this.
Go Blue, Greg.
Go Blue.